Hello, my name is Russ Timpson. I'm the founder of the Tall Building Fire Safety Network. What you're about to see is a video from our 2025 Tall Building Fire Safety Conference. You can find more other great videos on tall building fire safety on our YouTube channel, and there are many more presentations on our website, www.tallbuildingfiresafety. If you find our videos and presentations useful, please like and subscribe us on our YouTube channel. Halfway through the video, you're going to see details of our 2026 conference, which will take place in May in London. We have a fantastic program, and we also have a separate high-rise firefighting masterclass with Brent Brooks and special guests from around the world. There are also details of our 5-day intensive tall building fire safety management course, which will be running in London throughout 2026, but also in the Mediterranean, in Cyprus and in Malta. This is an ideal course for anybody who's dealing with fire safety matters in tall and complex buildings. So I hope you find these videos useful. And as we say in the Tall Building Fire Safety Network, go high and go well. Thanks.
I'm following those two very digital presentations. This is very analog.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned the golden thread, but I think just my name is Brad. I'm coming from a company called Sertus. I am the Commercial and Specifications Manager, and like I say, I'm here to give a perspective from a manufacturer's viewpoint as to why it's so critical to get manufacturers engaged early, and then I'll hand over to Stephen and Andrew that will give their parts on overall design and fire service and fire safety. So when I say we are a manufacturer, we're specifically a manufacturer of smoke control equipment. This is a very basic building design you can see on the screen here, really just to illustrate the products that Sertus specialise in. So you can see on the left hand side there AOVs, so automatic opening vents, the most common sort of smoke control measure or products that you would see in a building. You can see there head of a stair. We've also got mechanical extract fans, so our product, the extract pod, on the roof of the building there to mechanically extract that smoke out of a building if there is a fire, and then smoke control dampers positioned on every level, on every corridor, interfacing with that smoke control shaft. So they're sort of the three core products that we talk about, ultimately the mechanical products that build up an overall smoke control system. Like I say, talking about early engagement and making sure that a manufacturer and others are there to have that holistic discussion early stages. What are the risks when a product manufacturer who is responsible for providing compliant equipment for these systems, what are the risks if a manufacturer is not engaged at an appropriate point whilst a building or a system is being designed? We've got some examples here on the screen which we'll go through in the next few slides, but it ultimately boils down to that top section there, that the headline of the slide there is risk. It's ultimately risk. That's what we're all talking about in our slides here. It's minimising risk, whether that be a compliance risk, a time delay risk, the risk of solutions not getting explored properly, and I suppose ultimately all of those could be routed back down to commercial risk ultimately for that building. But more importantly, and what we should be focusing on when it comes to compliance, is the risk of lives. That's what we're here to try and do. Fire safety, protect people, protect occupants, protect the fire brigade when they try to come in and extinguish the fire. That's what we're talking about here, is that minimisation of risk. We've got a very brief example there of a picture of an extremely common, more common than you'd like to think, of what happens when smoke control design is just not thought of in a construction project. This was, obviously, like you can see, the project has progressed. They're on site. I would like to think that now that the gateway process is in place, that it wouldn't get to this point. But the premise of this picture is that there was no consideration as to what product was meant to go into that hole. So when it came to the building is up, the concrete structure has been built and designed and is up, They've now got to a point where they need to put a product in there and select a product, but the hole's too small, and that leads to very expensive, very timely rework, which is ultimately could have been resolved by a conversation at the front end. Those examples that I've said on the previous page, we've just got a few slides each for each of those, just to run through the implications of that. So the main challenge, and probably most of my time, is spent talking about shaft dimensions, shaft sizing, and making sure they're appropriately sized for a compliant product to be installed in there. That's more often than not, a shaft isn't big enough, or more specifically wide enough for an appropriate product to go in there. Then when you try to fit a compliant product into that structural opening, you're finding that it's clashing with adjacent structural structures that is ultimately what leads to non-compliance. This example on the right hand side was when that particular project arrived with myself. It was pretty far along the design stage, into stage 4, so a lot of the structural design of that project is already done and dusted, and at that point very difficult to change. But that was the solution that they proposed, to install the smoke control damper into that shaft. So the damper would be the red rectangle there, then you can see the smoke shaft as that rectangle. That, as it is, typically would be a non-compliant installation. A smoke control damper would need a 75mm perimeter on all 4 edges to any adjacent structures. Us as a manufacturer, when we test the product, that's part of the testing process. So we can only verify that product's performance in that type of installation unless we've tested otherwise. So fortunately, in this scenario, we have done that test, but that is a non-standard test. So that is a test that we've done based on what we've seen in industry, and therefore gone to a test house and applied that to make sure that we can provide a solution for that particular application. So in this case, we were able to assist on that particular project. But if that never came across our desk, that could get through, submitted to Gateway, either rejected or overlooked, get to site. If that does get flagged, go straight back as a potentially a major change if they can't find a product that fits into there, and they need to do something to the structural work of that building to get a product that fits into there and will do the requirements of that system. So hopefully you can start to see now, without going into too much more detail, the implications of not having that conversation up front. Next one was a similar or related issue, but again, space comes down to space. I've got there, we can't fit what you didn't plan for, and you can't plan if you don't know something's going to fit. So really having that conversation up front to understand the spatial implications of these products, particularly roof space, as I've highlighted here. Roof space is becoming more and more of a premium. For some reason, people want to spend more and more time on roofs. Who knows why, but they do. It's a good place for green roofs and for relaxational spaces in these commercial office buildings that are getting built. And if it's not that, then it's often full of plant equipment, for example, and there is an implication of there's a lot more equipment that are going into these buildings and getting put on roofs, and therefore making sure that you've got adequate space for the fire safety components that build up that system is crucial. This is an example of a product that one of our products that we've tried to tackle that problem. A traditional installation for a smoke extract fan would be on a horizontal plane, you can see on the left-hand side. But as we've seen more and more issues crop up along these lines, having a vertical solution that ultimately takes up no floor space on the roof. Now, there are limitations to that because there's only so high that you can go, for example, on projects, so on and so forth. But again, when that does work, we're working with the client, we're working with the designers to help try and maximise the available space for that particular project. The final one here, before I talk a little bit about something slightly different, is compliance versus certification. Now it seems to sort of be becoming my catchphrase a little bit, but I'm just going to keep rolling with it until it catches on, is certification does not equal compliance. Just because a product has got a certificate doesn't mean that it is compliant for how you intend to use it. That can be quite a scary sort of phrase if you're not sort of au fait with the application of a product and its certification. But the message in its simplest terms is, when you certify a product, there's a methodology in the testing process which is defined, and as the manufacturer we have to follow that test process in order to verify, or in order to get a pass, in order to get that certificate. But when it comes to the real world application, it is very, very common that the real world application for that product does not match how it's been tested, and therefore there is a risk of non-compliance. If we can't prove that our product will perform in the application it's going to be used in, that's a non-compliance. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think in the past there was, okay, if it's got a certificate then it's all good, we know it works, but that's not the case anymore. We need to be a lot more thoughtful about that. And as buildings become more complex, particularly tall buildings, a lot more intricate designs are happening. Therefore, making sure that you're taking into account the application of that product to guarantee its compliance is more important. I've got this note about dark arts perceptions at the bottom, which take this with a pinch of salt because it's a bit of a personal viewpoint, really. I think that the smoke control, let's call it industry, if you like, has previously been quite siloed. It's been maybe a bit scary for people to get involved with. But like I mentioned earlier, a building as a system and a smoke control system is just one of the piece parts of that overall system in a building. Therefore, making sure that conversation is held with all those different systems that it intersects with is where we need to be looking to make sure that we're achieving compliance when installing and designing these systems. The final point about sort of sustainability and the suitability of a product when thinking about the overall sort of life cycle of a building ultimately. That still comes back to, again, compliance of a product. If a product has only been tested for a reliability cycles of 300 cycles, it's therefore only certified to be used 300 times. If that's going to be no good for how it's intended to be used in the lifespan of that building, ultimately it's not compliant. So you need to make sure that, again, when it comes to the overall life cycle of a building, that the right products are being specified for how it's going to be used. As a manufacturer, we need to be very mindful of making sure that we're optimizing our product selections for a product to make sure we're not over-engineering or oversizing products and producing wastage, for example. So there's still an element of sustainability, if you like, in terms of this whole discussion about compliance. And there's a lot that manufacturers can do to contribute towards that. The final slide before I hand over to the next speaker is I want to end on a slightly more positive note. Compliance and making sure that we are being compliant in our design and the product that we specify. Since the introduction of the Building Safety Act, there are now a lot more transparent consequences if you don't do that. Even if that consequence is just that a Gateway 2 submission gets rejected and then therefore has to go back through, that's still a very serious consequence to that particular project. And we as the manufacturer have started to see improvements. We have started to see a lot more questions and interrogation from architects and designers about the product, about how they're going to be used, sizing the right product. So it is starting to do what it needs to do, which is really great to see. But we do still see the other side of the coin, which is stuff popping up on site and then not fitting and so on and so forth. It's recently became sort of knowledge to me that one of the main reasons for Gateway 2 submissions getting rejected and not getting through or getting approval is actually the smoke control system and the smoke control design, and not having sufficient proof that it is meeting the building regs and keeping those escape paths clear. Now, if that isn't giving us alarm bells about making sure that we're getting smoke control design right and making sure that we're engaging early so that we can interface with the overall system of the building and prioritise compliance, that's an early warning flag for us ultimately. That's all from me.